Welcome back. The world cannot pretend the conflict playing out today is one limited to the perimeter of Ukraine. But who will play the next move? Will Putin push a West weak further? Will NATO move beyond hollow condemnations? Will the next move be played by China in Taiwan as a result of what's happening geopolitically in another part of the world? Let's debate.
Right now, we have basically reached Volensky area where just a short while ago there was a shell attack. What I can just show you right now on your screens are smokes billowing out. As you can see, the emergency, the evacuation that was being done, and they're trying to douse the fire. It was just a short while back. A short while back when the shell hit. There are two shells that there were two places where the shelling actually took place. In the area which is a little far away, where the shelling took place in a residential building. And as you can see right now, just behind me, where this shell attack actually took place. Now, this place, this is the crater that has been created, the impact of the attack that took place. First we were told that this was the shelling that took place, and now locals are saying this was rather a drone attack. This area that you see just behind me, there is smoke still billowing out. We've been here for almost an hour right now, but it's been very, very difficult for the authorities here to control the fire which is just spreading. On the other side, which we are not going to go because there's still the fire is still raging, and that's the reason why we are going to stay away. The devastation is real. In the last 48 hours, we have come across various residential areas in Kiev that has come under massive attack. Innocent lives have been lost here in Kiev. The question is, how long will Putin continue? There is a lot of humbug about sanctions against Russia, but will NATO militarize against Putin? The West says that they have drawn up an umbrella coalition against Russia. They've talked about economic sanctions, but will that be enough to deter Russia?
In alignment with the decision by our European allies, the United States will join them in sanctioning President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov and members of the Russian National Security Team.
We will be imposing sanctions on President Putin and his fellow architects of this barbaric war, his Chief of Staff and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
I'm in close contact with President Zelensky. And as Prime Minister, I speak for us all in the United Kingdom when I say, once again, Slava Ukraini.
It is an exceptional step to sanction leaders, but this is an exceptional situation. We need to be absolutely clear. Vladimir Putin has unparalleled personal power over his country, and he has chosen to go to war against a neighbour that posed no threat to Russia because he wants to reverse history.
至少客观上 undermine 这个西方对俄罗斯的中国不赞成的制裁。
All that we know is that the world is in flux. The choices made outside Ukraine will determine the future of this nation. With video journalist Surendra Singh Rawat and my colleague Mridul Sharma, this is Shavan Sen reporting from Kiev.
From Kiev, I am joined by the former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Oleksandr Honchak. Mr. Honchak, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, friends, for attention to our country.
It is, we are reporting from across Kiev today, and we are very concerned. Mr. Honchak, firstly, you are on the direct list that apparently has been reported. There is an arrest or kill list that Russia has. the Russians are in and around Kiev, but you have chosen to stay on in Kiev, and you say that you're learning to fight yourself. So, are you aware that you're on a list, allegedly, that Russia has of people who must either be quickly arrested and taken into custody by the Russians or killed?
You're right. There is a list, but I'm not afraid because we have this war already 8 years, and all Ukrainians in danger. All Ukrainians in Putin's kill list, because Putin has his red button, and we realize that this mad strong man can use this button any moment. So I believe that Putin recognizes only power, and that's why it's absolutely not enough from the Western countries, from civilized world, to have economic sanctions. It's absolutely necessary to show him that NATO and civilized world, all over the world, free world, will protect Ukraine military if he will continue his actions, his military actions. They crossed all possible lines. So it's not about me. All Ukrainian people now in danger, in direct danger. You showed perfectly that Putin attacked, he bombed, shelled Kiev, our capital, but not only Kiev, a lot of our cities in Ukraine. And that means that Ukrainian people on Ukrainian land can't feel themselves safe if Putin is still attacking our country.
But how long can Ukraine hold out? I thought, Mr. Honchak, that the NATO would act if the Russian forces were to go beyond Luhansk or the Donetsk region. And when Kiev started getting pounded, and our reporters are sending us some really disturbing pictures of the nature of bombings that have happened, I would have expected NATO to respond by now. You're pleading, you're asking. What we are hearing is, okay, America is going to give $350 million of assistance. Is that what you need? Will that help you in any way? Do you really expect NATO or America to respond? And if they don't respond militarily, then what will you do? How can you take on Russia? You can hold out for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks at most, but can you avoid a takeover?
First of all, we should realize that Russia already lost an initiative. Thousands of Russian soldiers already killed. More than 100 tanks already destroyed. More than 500 military machines were destroyed already. Our Ukrainian military forces acting perfectly, very effectively against Russians. So we're not afraid. Now we are pushing back very effectively. And they already have lost a lot of their people. And I believe that Ukraine is strong enough to push back anyway. I'm sure, I'm confident about this. But 8 years ago, when Russia started this war, when Russia invaded Ukraine, annexed Crimea, invaded Donbass and Luhansk region, the response of NATO, Western world response was very weak. It was vegetarian. It was so weak that Putin understood that for him, it's possible to do everything he wants. If now the West will repeat the same mistake, the West will have additional more wars by Mr. Putin. So it's absolutely necessary for the future of the world to show to Mr. Putin that in 21st century, it's absolutely unacceptable to use military power to change borders, to attack neighbors, peaceful, democratic neighbors. It's not a battle for Ukraine. It's not a regional conflict. Russia invaded Ukraine because of our democratic choice, because we are democracy. And Putin is scared of democracy. The main threat to Mr. Putin, to Kremlin's regime, criminal regime, is to have a democracy in Russia. And Ukraine is a perfect example for Russian people that it's possible on a post-Soviet space, it's possible to build successful, democratic, free country. That's why Putin is so aggressive towards Ukraine. And that's why Mr. Putin attacks us to destroy our nation and to take our freedom.
With us live right now, I'd like to reintroduce you. Many people joining in right now, Mr. Honchak. And with us now live is Oleksandr Honchak. He's remarkably young, former Prime Minister of Ukraine. He's been Prime Minister of Ukraine for about a year and has been pivotal to the transformation of Ukraine's post-Soviet state apparatus. And he's a fierce critic of Putin. And ladies and gentlemen, he keeps saying, he's saying it now tonight. And if you viewers, you have a question, I'll take one question. Mr. Honchak, I'm going to invite questions from the public watching tonight. I'll take one question, ladies and gentlemen. You send me the question on coup. On coup, we'll take one question. You can ask the question directly to Mr. Honchak, former Ukrainian Prime Minister. But before that, Mr. Honchak, you've been quoted extensively in the global media as saying that Putin only recognizes power, not talks. He recognizes and respects only power. And you've said, if you don't stop Putin now, then this will be the beginning of a third world war. And you have also predicted that it's Ukraine tomorrow, Poland day after, and all of Eastern Europe after that. You presented a frightening scenario where Putin will just carry on moving ahead and ahead and ahead. Is that a guess? Or do you have some...
You're right.
Fundamental information on
right.
the basis of which you're saying that as a former Ukrainian PM?
Thank you for this question. It's a perfect question. As I already mentioned, it's not a war against Ukraine. It's a war against democracy as a model. That's why Russia has military conflicts with all democratic neighbors. Moldova, Georgia, now Ukraine. And it's very important to understand that that Russia uses very broad number of aggressive, but not always military tools to undermine democracy in the world. Sometimes it's military coup, like in Balkans. Sometimes it's supporting anti-vaccination campaigns like in Germany and Europe. Sometimes it's about compromising the elections in the United States. Sometimes it's creating artificial energy crisis in Europe, migration crisis in Europe, creating a puppet regime like in Belarus. Frankly speaking, Russia already annexed Belarus. So Belarus is not an independent country anymore. Belarus has only like official independence, but in real life, Lukashenko is another one strongman. It's just a puppet of Mr. Putin, and that Belarus now is totally controlled by Russia. Now you should understand that some part of these military tanks and forces came to the territory of Ukraine from the territory of Belarus. So formally, technically, two countries attacked Ukraine, Russia and Belarus at the same time. But we're speaking about Russia, first of all, because Belarus is only a tool. Belarus is only a puppet. So Russia playing globally, and it's not about Ukraine. It's about it's like building an empire against democracy and undermining democracy as a model in all over the world, even in United States. Political murders, military coups, artificial crises. This is a very broad range of these aggressive instruments. But now Russia crossed the last possible line. Russia openly invaded independent, the biggest in Europe, democratic, free country, openly invaded. And they failed already because Ukrainian military forces pushed back and destroyed a lot of their troops. And I believe that now the political crisis in Russia will start.
Will Putin stop at Ukraine? What will he do next?
I can hear you.
Will Putin stop at Ukraine? Will Putin stop at Ukraine? You think?
Dear Arnab, please repeat it one more time. I didn't hear you.
I will. Okay. So Oleksiy, what I said is, will Putin stop at Ukraine? Or is he going to open up more flanks? Poland, Finland, other Baltic countries. Are his ambitions beyond Ukraine, or will it stop at Ukraine? That was my question.
Putin will stop because Ukrainian forces already stopped Mr. Putin. But Putin now is a big danger for all the world. Now they are playing in the region of our nuclear power plant, Chernobyl region. They are playing their games. Now they can destroy some objects of critical infrastructure and create a huge damage to our country, and not only for our country. So Putin is a mad, absolutely crazy strongman with a red button. And we should realize that Putin can go as far as we let him go, you know? So it's very easy to understand. He invaded Georgia in 2008, 14 years ago.
Last question to you, Mr. Honchak, and this question comes to you. This question to the former Prime Minister of Ukraine on the coup social media app comes from Ajish Nair, who says, it's a question from one of our viewers in India who says, Arnab, can you please ask the former PM of Ukraine, in the larger interest, can Ukraine suspend the idea of joining NATO?
Look, it's a sovereignty, Ukraine is a sovereign country. And it's our decision to choose our tools to defend ourselves. So for us, for Ukraine, NATO is only a tool to live peacefully and to be protected. It's only a tool. It's not an ultimate goal, because Ukrainian nation is a peaceful nation. We are not going to attack somebody. We just want to live peacefully. And maybe you know, then many years ago, during more than 25 years ago, Ukraine gave up our military third in the world military potential to Russia and signed the Budapest Memorandum. And the big countries, global countries, Russia, United States, UK, promised us and gave us guarantees that our sovereignty and territorial integrity will be protected. And we was betrayed because we gave up our nuclear weapon, and then in 25 years, more than 25 years, we are invaded by Russia. And Russia operates our military, our nuclear weapons. That's very important to understand. That Ukraine made everything possible, previously, everything possible, not to create a threat to the neighbors and to the world, because we are not going to attack. We just want to live peacefully. And for us, NATO is the only visible and credible tool to feel and to live more or less, to be more or less protected, globally protected. Because of course our troops can push back and can fight Russian troops. But anyway, in the end of the day, Russia has absolutely overwhelming, absolutely incredible amounts and tons of resources spent on their weapons. And we don't want to spend all our budget, all our money, all our future to become more and more weaponized. It's one-way ticket for in our understanding. That's why the NATO model for us is a good model, because we are ready to be a part of a global security infrastructure, global order infrastructure, but not to expect and not to be attacked or invaded by our neighbors. For Ukraine, it's only a tool.
Yes. Well, Mr. Honchak, all I'd say is stay safe. And I look forward to talking to you again. Lot of responses to what you're saying from our viewers across India. That's Oleksandr Honchak, former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, sir. And I'd like to go across straight to Boris Volkhonsky and Alexander Bretersky. Boris Volkhonsky is an associate professor at the Moscow State University, and Alexander Bretersky is a senior analyst. I'd like to start with them. While I also welcome General Bakshi and Victor Gao from Delhi and Beijing. Lord Popat is a member of the House of Lords in the UK. He's joining us. Hussein Oylupinar is an academic advisor at the Foreign Policy Institute in Ankara, Turkey. Dr. Chung Li is the president of the Prospect Foundation, which is a well-known Taiwan-based foreign policy think tank. He's joining us from Taipei. And Colonel Richard Outson is a retired U.S. Army colonel and former senior advisor at the State Department. Thank you all very much. Mr. Boris Volkhonsky, how far will Putin go? 3 days. 3 days. There's no change on the ground.
Well, actually,
there's no change on the ground. How far will Russia go?
Well, I've been listening to a lot of ridiculous fantasies spoken by our Ukrainian counterpart. I'm not going to answer them because they're too ridiculous to answer, to contradict. Well, the thing is that there's no intention to invade Ukraine, as you put it. The intention is to protect the newly independent Donetsk and Lugansk republics. For that, you need to destroy the military infrastructure of Ukraine, because the missile launchers and heavy artillery stationed in residential quarters. So there cannot be any aerial strike against them. But what is needed is protection from heavy aerial strikes and the use of other Ukrainian military infrastructure. That's why Russian troops are advancing in crucial directions, not in order to invade Ukraine or to occupy it or to make it part of Russia. No, that's not the purpose, that's not the target. So as Putin put it, the idea is to demilitarize Ukraine and to denazify it. Well, demilitarizing has been already done for the most part of it. Despite what was a Ukrainian guest was saying, well, the military infrastructure has been destroyed very severely. I just wonder why did he say that the Ukrainians killed millions of Russian troops? So he said only thousands. Well, but let it be on his conscience. Well, and the second task, the denazifying, is of course more difficult because for 30 years of independent existence of Ukraine, they have brought up a generation which is totally brought up in the framework of Nazi ideology, and that's what this country has been doing for 8 years against the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, which are not recognized at that time, and they were bombing constantly. The world was silent.
Yes, I think I lost the last part. I'd like to put the same question to Oleksandr Bratevsky and then maybe get a response from the other side. Mr. Bratevsky, it's not been, the sense one is getting it's not been as quick and swift as the Russians had predicted. Today's the third day. There are reports of significant Russian reverses, and the Ukrainians are not giving up. The longer this goes, are the Russians also ready to take in more casualties, more damage to their troops, and more importantly, you know, the prediction which had been that Russians will just go in and take Kiev is not happening. The reality, it's not happening. The Ukrainians are holding out.
Well, that's very true. The Ukrainians are holding up, and you should also note that the Ukrainian army is well trained. And the Ukrainian army was in the Soviet Union. The Ukrainian soldiers were I would say the second strongest, or some, almost the same as Russian soldiers by the strong intellect and the war power. However, of course, if the situation in about 3 days will not end into kind of negotiations, asking Mr. Zelensky to surrender on certain terms, that means the war will actually continue. The Ukrainian army might actually get into a partisan war. For example, now we see, in the Russian media, that some of the leader of the Russian parliament has said that Mr. Zelensky is leaving the city. So that means kind of a disinformation. If the commander-in-chief is leaving, then the army might lay arms, for example. We see that Mr. Zelensky, a former actor, is actually acting very bravely. I would also like to subscribe to my colleague, the Russian colleague view. Yes, the Ukrainian army under President Poroshenko has heavily bombed Donbass, and many people have been killed. That's also true. Just like Boris Yeltsin, the first president of the Russian Federation, has killed many people in Chechnya, not only criminals, but that the same things were done by Mr. Poroshenko. Now, for me, Ukraine looks like Yugoslavia. In 1991, Mr. Johnson, when he said there was no war in Europe, that the U.S. and Britain was bombing Yugoslavia. Yes, Mr. Milosevic was a bad guy, but many people have been killed in Belgrade and other parts of Yugoslavia. So now Russia acts like U.S., and Putin acts like Bill Clinton in 1991. Yes, he was the president of a democratic country, and Mr. President of Russia is an autocratic president. But while I do subscribe to things what the Ukrainian former PM has said about Russia's mistakes and stuff, yes. But in the same time, Ukraine has also done a lot of things for this to happen. This is not to justify an aggression against a peaceful country. But I think the whole picture is not a black and white, and we should see it as analysts from different perspectives. Although I do regret casualties and killings of Ukrainian people, and I have many friends in Ukraine and in Kiev, and I feel very bad what's happening.
Yeah, of course. Colonel Outsen, please. And now let's open up the discussion. It all comes down to this. Kiev is bound to fall without military intervention. Am I wrong? It could take time. It is bound to fall militarily. And then there could be a longer-term insurgency against any Russian military presence. The Russians will have no choice, Colonel Outsen, but to continue a military presence, and will come under a great amount of domestic Ukrainian insurgency, battle, and constant threat. So, but in the short term, is there any doubt in your mind that Kiev falling is a matter of time?
Well, I like the way you've laid out the medium-term scenario, Arnab. I think you're right. I think that one thing the Russians have learned is that the Ukrainian will to fight and sense of national identity and resistance is intact. And it may be that Kiev will fall. We'll see. Urban fighting is notoriously difficult. And as the Russians have found, every time they've done an air assault or an infiltration attempt, the Ukrainians are fighting in their cities and in their towns. So what does it mean for Kiev to fall? Does it mean will Russians enter? I think it's likely that some Russians are already there. Will the Russian forces control the city? No. And what's been demonstrated is that the Ukrainian military will continue to fight even were certain government centers to be seized, including Kiev. But note that today NATO has ramped up military support. Even the Germans now are allowing arms to flow. As long as the Ukrainians retain the will to fight, what you're seeing is that NATO and other countries are now increasing pressure.
But NATO, sorry, but I think you're overestimating what NATO's done. And just to counter you on that, I want to go to Hussein Olupinar from Ankara. Would you agree with what Colonel Outsen says? Because my own sense is NATO's only adopted a conventional defensive posture to deter attacks. But it's not enough to push back against Putin. What do you think, Mr. Hussein?
Look, NATO is a defensive alliance. They have members. They have Article 5 clause, which is applicable only for the members, not for Ukraine. Ukraine is not a NATO member. So NATO will not take position for Ukraine. They will take position for their members. So they are doing it. So why taking position for their members in NATO countries bordering Ukraine? They will certainly will not push back Putin, but they will make sure that Putin doesn't spread the war into NATO territories. This is what he is aiming to do. And furthermore, he will look for chances to get into shaking the NATO, break the alliance in order to free the Baltic states, which they want to control from the NATO alliance protection. And moreover, they will deal with Romania and Bulgaria if they will find the chance. For this, NATO is standing united so far, and it's getting and finding more reasons to exist. So the fact that Putin moved into Ukraine is rebuilding and redefining NATO alliance. Certainly, he broke the security defense mechanisms of all over the world. The perception of security will change after this unjustified war against Ukraine. And the world will find a new balance, and Vladimir Putin is pushing for a new balance in the world. If he will succeed, certainly he will find the ways to put the founding stones of a new security deal all over the world. If he fails, certainly he has to reconsider what he wants to do with his power in his capacity. Certainly the problem is here, the nuclear power he is controlling. And the question in the next period, if we can see and survive until that time, who has to control nuclear powers? Can a rogue state, a tyrant or an authoritarian state control nuclear arms if they are too dangerous? This is from where we will start once the war is contained, once Russian aggression is contained in Eastern Europe. The world has to come to the terms of talking about it. We don't need more nuclear arms, and we don't need any unwise people controlling it, or a country which looks for imperial expansion.
But power is only, as effective as the demonstrated ability to use it. So Lord Popat is a member of the House of Lords of the UK, and I saw a lot of statements and a lot of political solidarity around Ukraine. And there were protests across London. Thousands yesterday. Lord Popat came out, for the Ukrainian flags, Lithuanian flags everywhere. But at the end of the day, everyone's just watching, including the UK. You promised to help, the British promised to help, you gave some military assistance to the Ukrainians, but when push came to shove, you're doing nothing. What are the consequences of doing nothing, Lord Popat, for the West, for NATO, for Britain?
Well, this is a war between Russia and Ukraine, and it does not necessarily point to any larger conflict in the making. And what we have done, both President Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson have affirmed severe sanctions that will be put in effect to Russia, but there's no intention to deploy either British or US troops to Ukraine's aid at this moment. However, the stance can potentially change should the conflict spill over beyond Ukraine into any of our NATO members. And as you know, the ex-Prime Minister Honchak mentioned earlier, that NATO is a great tool. It gives it protection and security to many members within both Eastern Europe and Europe. And Ukraine, I'm afraid, is not a member of NATO. But there is tremendous support for Ukraine by the British people. They're marching. Lord
Popat, I have great. Lord Popat, I disagree with you to the limited extent that everyone I'm speaking to from the anti-Russian bloc seems to be saying essentially to us, we're sorry for Ukraine. Our hearts are with the people of Ukraine, everyone. But this is not our problem. And I think that's a very convenient posture, isn't it? To say so, General Bakshi, that it's not our problem. General Bakshi.
Arnab, let me make three quick points. My heart bleeds for the Ukrainians, because the NATO and the United States seem set to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. The standard, I'm not into any morality play, I'm talking as a military analyst. The standard, Russian way of taking cities in recent times is what we saw in Chechnya. They would surround the city, use 30, 40, 50 batteries of Grads and multi-barrel rocket launchers to pound it from the air with their Su-25 Frogfoots, cruise missiles, what have you. The tanks would dash for the city center and then radiate outwards. So every country has its own way of war fighting. The Russian way of war fighting is characterized by heavy usage of firepower, almost shock and awe, multiplied many times over. What one saw in this campaign was a curious absence of firepower on the Russian scale. What we just saw was very precise strikes on some military installations. Quite obviously, they haven't worked. Yesterday, we were anticipating that they had landed an air assault brigade at the Antonov airport, 23 kilometers away from Kiev. And then in traditional military playbooks, there is a link-up, a land link-up. That land link-up was coming with the 41st Army hitting out of Belarus. But yesterday, that army was stopped by Putin because apparently he wants to win the information war, or he wanted to show that he was doing it without much collateral damage. Now, in fighting in built-up area is very heavy in troops. And if you want to do that, you have to use heavy suppressive power. Like I said, no morality play. I'm just talking by the military playbook, the Russian military playbook. We haven't seen evidence of that firepower. So in trying to win the information war, he may end up, taking heavy losses in the ground war. I don't think he will. Tonight is decisive, tomorrow is decisive. And I am very afraid, I am very worried that the Russians, now that their back is being put up against the wall with this sudden Ukrainian pushback, they will use heavy firepower. Who will suffer? The Ukrainians. Who will bleed? The Ukrainians. Whose houses will be destroyed in fighting in built-up area, where from every building you can fire Kalashnikovs and you can fire, RPGs, you can fire Javelin missiles, SAM-6 or the Stinger missiles. Well, then the whole city becomes a battleground. Now, was the Russian plan to hold on to the cities?
That's that situation.
So.
1 minute, Bakshi. Bakshi, I want to ask Boris Volkonsky. 1 minute, Bakshi, I want to ask Boris Volkonsky. No, just allow me 1 minute, please. Is that going to happen, Mr. Volkonsky? That because of the Ukrainian pushback, the worry General Bakshi has is that he's basically saying the Russians are going to pound Kiev, pound civilian areas, and that's going to lead to heavy casualties for innocent people, not military personnel.
Actually, what you call a pushback, I think it was a kind of stoppage ordered by the Russian command, because there were signs that there could be talks between negotiations between Ukrainian leaders and Russian leadership, and that's why Russian assault stopped for a while. But it doesn't mean that Russian assault is not developing. So I don't think so. Until now, there has been no signs that the Russian military will use anything apart from the high precision missiles and strikes, as General put it very clearly. And that's why there is no idea of pounding the cities, the peaceful civilians. But the other thing is that the Ukrainians are placing their missile launchers and heavy artillery in the residential areas, which is against all of the rules of law. They're using the civilians as a human shield, which Russia is not going to pound on. So I don't think it will happen.
Arnab, can I just quickly add?
Yeah.
Arnab, I am going by the Russian playbook, right? We've been studying the Russian way of war very, very closely, especially in India, because a lot of the weapons that we have come from the Russian inventory, their design philosophy, etc. We saw the fighting in Chechnya. You have to use heavy suppressive firepower, if you want to deal with Javelin-type anti-tank guided missiles which have been flooded into Ukraine, with Stinger missiles which have been flooded into Ukraine. And in fighting in built-up area, I'm sorry, it is extremely difficult to distinguish between civilian and an armed combatant. 18,000 civilians have been given Kalashnikovs. Now the Kalashnikovs are useless against tanks and BMPs. But the javelins, which the Americans have given in huge numbers, and the Stinger missiles, that is the Afghan playbook. That is how the Hind helicopters were knocked out in Afghanistan. So to avoid that, if you want to save your low-flying aircraft, the high-flying ones using precision-guided munitions will be safe. But you will have to pound with suppressive firepower unless you want heavy casualties. I mean, that is military logic. And I'm afraid if the Russian general in charge wants to win, and the fact is, why would they want to lose? Why would they want to lose? They cannot afford to stretch this out. Our anticipation was, we had war gamed this, that they will just hold on to Donetsk, to Luhansk to Crimea. The rest, whatever they occupy,
they've gone way beyond.
They don't want to get into Afghanistan.
No, that's a thing of the past now. I'd like to go across next to Taipei in Taiwan to Dr. Chung Li. A lot of people also concerned at what's happening. What are the ramifications of this? And Dr. Chung Li, this Taiwan is on alert. We are also concerned. Is Taiwan concerned? Because 9 Chinese aircraft entered your air defense zone in the last few days. Is there concern?
We are watching this very closely, and President Tsai will also issue a national security alert regarding how the situation will evolve, and also Taiwan join with other Western nations and regarding the Russians' invasion against Ukraine, and we stand up with Ukraine. So the president has already a very clear and directive in this sense, and the issue about whether Taiwan will be next, I think that basically depends on China, how China will see the things. There's a sense about how China's reading this, whether the successful or not about the Russian invasions and the Western response. If the Western is able to have an effective response, and also the Russians' invasion is not that successful, and how that brings up to the Chinese about the possible cost as well as their capabilities in terms of how to have an effective operation on Taiwan. And if the West, some people believe that if the West is not able to respond to this situation effectively, especially this is a clear violation of the nation's sovereignty, and try to use the military to solve the issues, which people believe that should be solved diplomatically. And then if this can be allowed, then China probably will be emboldened and encouraged to do similar things with Taiwan. So those are basically the general observations, not just from Taiwan, but also from other parts of the world regarding how they look at the connection between the Ukraine situation as well as in the Taiwan Straits.
And that is why I'd like to go to Dr. Victor Gao next. That is why it is important in some way to deter or counter Russia. It becomes necessary because otherwise China, for example, Dr. Victor Gao feels it as a territorial claim over Taiwan. And if Russia gets a free pass in Ukraine or beyond, then China is going to think that it can get a free pass in Taiwan. And that's why this is very convenient for China, with its own territorial ambitions over Taiwan and the South China Sea and so many other regions.
Well, this is Victor Gao from Beijing. Taiwan issue is very different from Ukraine. Ukraine is a sovereign country. Taiwan is part of China. Even the United States and the United Nations and all the countries in the world fully acknowledge that there is one China. Taiwan is part of China, and the People's Republic of China is the sole legitimate representative of China. If anyone denies that, then he is not living in this world. China has the power to liberate Taiwan tonight if it chooses, but China has waited, working for peaceful reunification. Let me assure your audience, no power in the world can stand in the way of national reunification of the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. Anyone trying to do that will be futile and will fail miserably. And I will assure you, just exactly like the United States will not send any soldier to fight in Ukraine, the United States will not send any single soldier to fight for Taiwan independence. Why? Because it is against the fundamental interests of the American people.
There you are.
This is the mega trend in the world.
No, there you are. No, there you are. I have been proven correct, Victor. I have been proven correct out here. And there you are. This is exactly what I said. Lord Poppert, I said this is not limited to Eastern Europe. This is the biggest boost for China, Lord Poppert. If the West does not respond effectively, does not respond. You heard it from Beijing right there. It's a matter of time before they do this in Taiwan. Lord Poppert, you hear that? Like to respond, please?
Correct. In fact, geopolitically, if aggressor like Russia can succeed in Ukraine, China will probably take a similar thing to Taiwan. And let me tell Taiwan is independent sovereign country, and frankly speaking, is Taiwan probably next? Hopefully not. It can even go to Arunachal Pradesh. It can go further. So we should never allow any aggressor like Russia or China to attack any of the neighboring countries. Geopolitically, it is wrong.
Allow me
Economically, it will have a huge impact, both Russia and China.
Allow me to say one thing. I think the guest from Mumbai does not represent the official position of India. Check out the official position of India. India fully recognizes, let me repeat, there is only one China. Taiwan is part of China, and the People's Republic of China is the sole legitimate representative of China. Go back to do your homework, do your academic study before you say nonsense on the public television.
I think our Beijing friends should.
Since you're being very aggressive.
I'm sorry for that. Yeah, Taiwan is an independent country. Taiwan has sovereignty, and also we have democracy. So this blatant lies is front of our international audience. I mean, you are going to shame yourself intellectually. I'm sorry to say that, but I also say that I hope that every conscious person, now when we're looking at the situation in Ukraine, it is very important to stop this bleeding and have a peace. Especially that no country should be allowed directly to use force in order to enforce its own will on other countries. And this goes to the situation in Ukraine. It also goes to the situation about Taiwan Straits.
Dr. Chung Li, I'm glad this little confrontation took place, because somewhere, Dr. Hussein Olupinar, my concern has been that most of the NATO, the West, other countries want to get out of this without getting their hands dirty or burning their fingers. And as a result, the precedent being set in Ukraine, will not be limited to Ukraine. You just hear the tone of Victor Gao from Beijing. He speaks for the Chinese establishment. He's very clear. Well, the threat to Taiwan is very real. It's a matter of time, Hussein.
Look, I suggest we keep the tone calm and as wise and gentleman as possible. I just recommend that we don't go harsh on each other too much. So let's have an intellectual conversation here. I will tell you this. If NATO touches Ukraine, Vladimir Putin threatened with nuclear bombs. He said that he will do something which the West never have ever experienced. A couple of days ago, he had a speech which was on TV. He said that you do not touch Ukraine. And the Western countries and NATO knows very well what he can do. This country, Russia, has a nuclear arms. They can use it. And he's terrorizing. So to have any NATO boots in Ukraine is not possible. This is going to be an entire European continental war, if not a world war. And you understand, if somebody uses nuclear bomb, then we have a world war. Now, if for the sake of saving Ukraine, can you risk starting a nuclear war? Yes, Ukraine has to be saved. But we are in a kind of closed, dead alley. We cannot go further from there. Ukraine has to survive. And
what happens to Taiwan? No, my question is, okay, that's a very pragmatic view. But that's a very pragmatic view. But tomorrow, when China brazens it out and invades Taiwan, what happens then? Richard.
Look,
sorry, Rich
I'm
Outset.
not an expert of South Pacific or China or Taiwan. But I will tell you this. I will give you a general plan of Russia. Russia wants a Eurasian center of the world. They want to establish this with China. They want multipolar world, and they want to end hegemony of United States, wherever possible. So I consider that on the borderlands of Eurasia, they will do everything to cut down Western influence, particularly American influence. This is the project. If they will succeed,
no, that is true. That is true. I understand your point, but I understand your point. No, I understand the larger geopolitical. I have two specific questions. First question goes to Boris Volkonsky. If China invades Taiwan, then if China invades Taiwan, will Russia silently stand in support of that? First, I want a response from Mr. Volkonsky.
Well, you see, yesterday's voting in Security Council showed that India, China, and probably some other country, I don't remember, I think there were 3 countries abstained from voting, which is UAE. Probably the right thing to do. The right thing to do, because it's not their war. So China-Taiwan issue is not actually is not an issue for Russian policy directly, at least directly. Indirectly, it may be. Definitely, as our professor from Uppsala said, definitely we do want a Eurasian center of the world. We do want to limit American hegemony, but it's not a matter of fighting for the cause of China, and invading Taiwan, or Taiwan fighting for its independence. And also, I would like to remind you.
It will globalize.
Well, I would like to remind you one event of 50 years ago, actually, when a country intervened in a part of another country in order to save the people from atrocities and genocide. Do you remember what the countries were in 1971? That was India, that was Pakistan, is part of Pakistan, and now it is free Bangladesh. So this is the purpose. Donetsk and Lugansk republics are independent and sovereign states. They should live. They should be left alone. They should live as they choose, and
Arnab, can I translate something?
To recognize them eventually.
Richard.
This discussion,
quick response.
This discussion of Eurasianism and American hegemony. Let me translate for you. When our friends in Moscow say Eurasianism, and those who listen to them, what they mean is the right of authoritarian states to quash small states. That stands for Russia, and that stands for China. That's not the world we want to live in. When they say American hegemony, what they mean is a system under which free nations bind together for collective defense. And this means we don't have to send American soldiers, but we have to send every ounce of help, sanctions, money, military assistance, and supplies to countries like Ukraine and Taiwan. We will stand with the small countries that are seeking their own freedom against these authoritarian bullies in Beijing and Moscow. And this will not stand in Ukraine because they don't have the strength to pull it off, and will provide the same sort of help to Taiwan if and when that comes up.
Okay, I will count. I'll just end with one counter to you. 500,000 communists were massacred when the US masterminded and executed the violent deposition of the popular Sukarno government in Indonesia. So, when you talk about smaller countries and free countries, somebody will say Indonesia was free before you came in, Chile was free before you intervened in 1973, Vietnam was free and thank God is free, Iraq was free. So, there are wrinkles in that argument, but I will leave it there. My concern continues to be, Victor, the fact that with the Chinese playing a quiet role behind this will be internationalized and this will not be limited to Ukraine. We hope peace prevails. I thank you very much for that conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me. And I just want to tell you we're increasing our presence across Ukraine, across the Baltic states, across Belarus. We are increasing our reporting strength on the ground, bringing you second-to-second coverage. So wherever you are through Sunday, tomorrow is a decisive day, remember. Very, very decisive day. And the only channel which will keep you up to date second to second is Republic. See you tomorrow. Goodbye.